Welcome to another exciting episode. Let me ask you this question. Have your relationship ever been in a rut? Has it ever got to that point where it just seemed like it's all going to end, or it's just overly boring and nothing is really going right? You're consistently arguing, you're consistently doubting whether or not you should even be in this relationship. If you have been there, or if you are there now, I got some key tips on how you can reset your relationship. But before we get into that, make sure you like, subscribe, and you go ahead and share the content. Now, as you notice, we are back in our old space for when we used to do these solo shows. But let's talk about resetting a relationship. And I've been in a situation where I've been in relationships where you feel like you're in a rut and you're trying to figure out how to ways to get out of it. You go on the dates, but what is some of the real reason for why we should do a relationship reset, right? So I know you're asking yourself, like, what is a relationship reset? Okay, now a relationship reset is a conscious effort to pause, reflect, and realign the partnership towards healthier and more fulfilling dynamics. Okay. So you have to take time to kind of figure out where you are in that moment. And by figuring out where you are in that moment, whether it's something that's affecting y'all externally or is it something affecting y'all internally, that's something that you got to figure out. And then you got to realign your relationship, because sometimes you both can be off balance. Maybe one person is working more and another person is working less. So then the times aren't syncing up so much. So then it feels like that y'all not emotionally connecting or having that communication about what's going on and what's happening. Okay. Now let's go into the definition. So a relationship reset is a purposeful shift in how you and your partner engage with one another. It says often prompted by emotional disconnection, recurring conflict, or a sense of stagnation. Remember when I said boring? Recurring conflict, you're consistently arguing. Maybe it's over money. Maybe it's just over like simple things. And then it's that emotional disconnection. So maybe you're not having you're not cuddling, you're not doing things together. You're not having that emotional connection. So we're going to go dig deep. I'm looking at my notes. Okay. Y'all gotta chill on me. I'm looking at my notes. So let's kind of dig deep into some of these things and kind of go over some examples and everything like that. So let's talk about emotional disconnection, which is a lack of emotional intimacy or feeling like a roommate instead of a partner. So in these situations, you stop sharing feelings, daily experiences, and future hopes. So being in that situation, so maybe you're not communicating what your intentions are. Maybe things for the future start to look bleak. In some cases, maybe there's somebody else that has caught your attention or has caught their attention, and they're a little distracted from the relationship because now they're having some emotional attachment with somebody else. And then you're not spending enough time with each other. So back to that one example where somebody's working more and another person's working less, or, they're working steadily. Then, you may not have that daily experience with each other. You may have a routine at one point in time. So you may have times where y'all woke up together. You may have times where y'all watched movies at a particular time together, or y'all had a particular show that y'all watched together. You had those various things that you had going on, but now it's no longer happening because of whatever reason. And this is kind of the reason for the reset, is so you can sit down and kind of figure out where that disconnect is happening at. So then we have constant conflict or the silent tension. So there are times where you may have conflict. So say you may disagree with a decision they have made, or maybe they have done something like spent money that you have for something else, and they spent it on a sound system, but this was for a class, or this was for a college fund, or this was for a vacation, but they end up taking the money and spending it on something else. So in those situations, you kind of have that constant conflict. Or it's situations where you're, say y'all just move in, so y'all starting to get used to each other's habits. So then in those situations, you're starting to understand that they have habits that you may not like, but you don't understand how to communicate it. So it turns into a conflict. It turns into an all-out argument. Those things happen, especially for people that's just moving in with each other that have not even lived with the opposite sex. So now you have to find that adjustment and find that balance. And if you can't communicate it sometimes, then more likely it turns into a full-on argument, and then turn into the silent treatment where y'all may not talk to each other for a few hours, on some cases a few days. Now, avoidance and withdrawal. Back to the silent treatment, avoiding, spending time with each other, avoiding having those tough conversations, having those difficult conversations. You gotta have difficult conversations in order for the relationship to grow. Some people say that you can't grow your relationship if you don't argue. You have to argue in order to grow, because it kind of gets out some of that tension, and you kind of make your way through the conversation or through the problem, in some cases through arguments, because you just getting it out there. But in some cases, those arguments, sometimes you can end up saying something that you really don't mean, and it makes it worse off for everybody, because now the two people that's in a relationship, now they're feeling awkward, they feel uncomfortable, and now they're trying to get back to a place where they're comfortable with each other despite of what has been said. So then you have that lack of physical intimacy. And physical intimacy, I like to think of it as there's different levels to intimacy. It's different levels for men for intimacy, and there's different levels for women for intimacy. For women, intimacy is it's a lot of things prior to the physical intercourse. But for men, it's kind of the physical intercourse, but it could be some things up into the physical intercourse, because men are visual when it comes to that thing and women are not. So there's a lot of things that you would do for a woman in order to get to that physical intercourse. But, for men, sometimes the emotion doesn't have to be there to have that intercourse. But for some women, there has to be some kind of emotion, some kind of feeling, something in there in order to make the physical intimacy even a bit romantic. And this is for if you're in a relationship. If you're like a sneaky link or whatever, I can care. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about sneaky links. I am more so referring to the idea of being in a relationship and going forward in a relationship, but you hit this point where you don't have physical intimacy, and each party could be doing everything correctly. If we go back to that previous example, and I know I'd like to use work, because work is one of those things where it can take you out of your comfort zone. It can take you out of your mindset. So when we talk about work, if you're working more hours, you're more tired. So you may not want to be intimate. You may just want to just go to sleep, and then you got to get prepared for the next day and get mentally prepared. Sometimes it just mentally takes you out of it, and you may be in a sexless relationship. That happens. So, and let's also talk about one of my favorite topics is unclear and violated boundaries. When we're talking about boundaries and you have somebody continuously overstepping those boundaries, you don't like to be touched a particular way. You don't like to be talked to a particular way. You don't like for this person to come in at all times of the night. You don't like for them to have their friends over beyond a certain period of time. There's certain things that you want to establish, especially when you're living with each other. You want to establish certain parameters in a relationship so each party knows the expectation. And I'll tell you this, that it was one point in time where I thought discussing expectations in a relationship was something that, you just learn and you just kind of figure out as you go along. But sometimes starting out with clear expectations as you move along into the relationship, or when you get to a certain period in relationship, you have certain expectations that you expect of your partner to do, not only for you, but for the benefit of the relationship as a whole. Because for the whole relationship, you should both have clear boundaries for the general of the relationship, and personal boundaries, which you will accept in a relationship and which you accept personally. I would differentiate those two, because what I may perceive personally and what I may receive in a relationship is, a little different. In a relationship, I may say that I don't want you can go out and hang with your friends, but can you be back at a reasonable time? Now that that's for the parameters of the relationship. And then for me personally, I don't have a boundary on time spent. Like, I like my space, but also I like to be together. So it's kind of a weird boundary. It's kind of, let's be here, but don't be here at all. it's, it's something like that. But for everybody, it's different. So let's talk about what a relationship reset can look like. Okay, so honest relationship check-in. So I've done this before in relationships where you have a check-in. So what that is it's a mutual vulnerable conversation about how each person truly feels and what they need. And this could be journaling, couple therapy, or structured questions. Now in these instances, if you're in a rut and you're trying to have these conversations, sometimes you can do it once a month. You can do it once a week. I won't make it too overbearing. I would leave time for adjustment and correction after these conversations to see how the other party kind of adjusts to the new dynamics. But having that check in and having those conversations, you kind of get an understanding, and you kind of learn the expectations, and you get to set boundaries. So you get it like a trifecta. You get an understanding, you get expectations, and you get boundaries. So you can start to put all those things in place, and you don't wait too long for the situation to happen for you to have that conversation. So you have that conversation right then and there at the check-in. Once you have that check-in, then you move on from there. Okay. And then as I stated, going into the next one, redefining boundaries and expectations. You can do that at the check-in. Then rebuilding emotional and physical connection. So once you get past that stagnation, once you get past that misunderstanding, once you have those boundaries and you have those expectations, you grow closer together, because now you didn't have a conversation. Now you had that clear understanding, and you can get back to that emotional and physical connection, because now nobody is guarded. Everybody is open, and you kind of start to move with a little bit more vulnerability with the person that you didn't have this conversation with, because now you want to open up more, because now you're trusting them more. You have more faith that they're not going to judge you harshly or judge you at all based on the things that you said, based on the things that came out at the check-in. Now, you can get professional help. Now along with professional help, that's always great, but try to kind of work it out amongst yourself first before you jump into the situation and say, well, you know what? I want to just talk. I want to go see a professional, but maybe you can resolve it yourself before you go and spend that money on a professional. Sometimes you can resolve it. If not, then obviously go and get professional help and build from there. Now, when a reset may not be enough, and this is for people that's in situations that may be abusive, so emotional, physical, financial. If one of both parties are unwilling to change or engage, if core values are fundamentally misaligned, wanting kids versus not wanting kids, want to be married versus not want to be married, then maybe you should really reconsider the person that you're talking to, because if what they want in the future doesn't align up with what you want, then there's always going to be some kind of conflict. If there's an abuse involved, then consider walking away. If core values and understanding and morals and a guided compass, religion, politics, if you can live with those things not being on the same page and misaligned, then you are a brave one. I can tell you that right now, because I can't do it whatsoever. But let me say, if you can do it and it's something that you can work with within a relationship, then definitely put your all into a relationship. But if there are things that are misaligned, definitely had a conversation and then reconsider what you want out of this relationship. And maybe that involves exiting the relationship. And sometimes it may involve some people want to try even more to try to get that understanding, which by all means, that's fine. Do what you do. I'm not judging you. Now, to wrap this all up, okay, we know that emotional distance, recurrent conflict, lack of intimacy, etc., is something that are definitely signs of a reset that needs to happen. Now, remember that having those check-ins is going to help the relationship because you're going to have that clear communication. And some people communicate very well and don't really need to check in. And other times the check-in is just beneficial so you can have a scheduled moment to be able to have the conversation with your partner and be able to have clear expectations, clear understanding, and being able to set those boundaries as you progress through the relationship. Now, I want to emphasize that even though you notice that some of these things aren't aligning with you, it doesn't mean that the relationship is a failure. I'm not saying that once you see a sign or you see the signs that you need to just exit the relationship. What I'm saying is that once you start to see these signs and you see that the relationship is starting to slow down, you see that there's lack of physical intimacy, you start to see that goals are not aligning, then you go through and you start to have these conversations and you try to work and build and gain understanding and learn what the expectations are as you move forward through the relationship. These are not necessarily failures. These are more so just tips on how to recognize when your relationship needs a major reset or just a reset in general. But I think if you go ahead and you take these tips and you put them into practice, then it starts to work out better in your favor. Now, I want you to go ahead and like the video. If you have any ideas or you have any other tips, make sure you go ahead and share them in the content. Make sure you share them in the comments. But don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If y'all have any feedback, any thoughts, I'd love to hear it. Drop it in the comments. I'll catch you on the next go around. Peace.